Well, look, this is an industry that's full of companies that missed the change in the market. You know, there's more dramatic examples than IBM because, at least in IBM's case, their cash cow, the mainframe, has remained intact. Nobody's taken that away from them. But take Wing. You know, Wing was this great, wonderful company, and you know, I went back and met Ian Wang, but because they missed the transition in word processors and mini computers, there is no Wing today. Yeah. Or take Digital Equipment, which more than any other company, you know, I sort of grew up admiring their view of time sharing, that people could get into the company. And those PDP machines, PDP-8s, PDP-10s, are what I, you know, played around with as a kid.
That's what you learned on in junior high school,
And
right?
so to have Digital bought up by Compaq, you know, which is, you know, the company that we pioneered a lot of great PC things with, it just shows this is a business where certainly you can miss the next trend. Now, and so what that means is, you know, when we had to move from DOS to the next thing, people said, oh, Microsoft won't make that transition. When we had to move from Windows up to Windows NT, people said we'd miss that. Then the internet came along and people said we'd miss that. I'm not saying that we can't miss things.
Did you almost miss that one?
That's a great example of one where it took a lot of retreats and brainstorming and sort of stepping back and saying, hey, how do we get into this phenomena? You know, there were various companies that were sort of born on the wave. This tidal wave emerged, and you know, if you were right there when it came up, you know, sort of that was Netscape and some others, you know, they were in the thick of it. And so we had to get ourselves really into the thick of that. We had to, you know, set our priorities in a different way and really experience it and let a lot of people, you know, come up with different approaches around that. So that's a fine example of, you know, is the company resilient? Are they still, you know, seeing what's happening out in the marketplace and taking what they're good at, which is building software products, and applying it to that new paradigm?
So does that wake you up at 3 a.m., the possibility the next one's going to come along and this company's going to be too slow-footed to catch this one?
Hey, that's going to happen someday.
Well, yeah.
You know, there's no company in the technology business that's forever. That's partly why it's such a fun business. I mean, if this was a business like making bread, you know, where you figured out your formula and you just stick with it, I wouldn't have wanted to be CEO for 25 years. It wouldn't have kept me engaged and excited and learning new things and having to figure out how to grow the business. Because it's such a fast-changing business, you know, I feel like every day I've been challenged to the fullest. And certainly in this new role, I'll have plenty of that challenge going forward.
Let's talk about growing up a little bit. Your dad was an attorney. Your mom was a teacher. What were they like? I met your dad. He's a formidable guy. Being 10 years old, he would have been a very formidable dad.
He's large and he's a serious attorney. And
what was his specialty? What kind of cases?
He actually ran the law firm, so they were involved in an incredible range of things. And my mom pretty early on got involved in a lot of community things, ended up being on the board of the university and the phone company and the insurance company and a lot of very interesting things. And they were good at sharing what they were up to at dinner at night, you know, talking about United Way and the challenges it faced or various lawsuits. And they had a lot of interesting friends, some of whom went on to have a great success in politics and some other things. So I lived in a very stimulating environment. I was encouraged to read. My parents were nice enough to send me to a pretty good school, partly because I'd been getting really bad grades, and they thought, it was at odds with what they thought my potential was, that, you know, I was very, very good at all these tests, but at school I wasn't that engaged.
Well, it must have driven your mom crazy being a teacher, that you're not doing well, you weren't doing well at school.
Well, yeah, and that's partly why they sent me to this, what at the time was a private boys' school with a heavy emphasis on, you know, kids staying focused. And that probably was good for me. And it's also out there that the very first computer terminal showed up, and some of us who, you know, I was in math class because I'd sort of read ahead, so I had some extra free time. We got very engaged in that thing. So I give my parents a lot of credit. The encouraging me to read, you know, giving me a sense of confidence, and then exposing me to what was going on out at Lakeside, I think made a big difference.
What did they give to you? What did your dad give to you?
Well, my dad always, you know, was talking about the challenges he had, as though, you know, it was interesting for me to hear about it, and you know, I might even have something to say about it. And they included us. They took us on trips. You know, we'd read the same books that our parents were reading.
This is you and your two sisters.
Right.
Were they older than you or younger than you?
Well, my older sister and I is just a couple years older than I am, so we basically grew up together. My younger sister is 9 years younger, and so she is almost she wasn't. You know, when I was in high school, she was still pretty young.
You said your older sister got great grades right up until the day she discovered boys, and then you became the scholar of the house.
Well, it was an interesting transition because Christy had always gotten straight A's, and there was this thing where if somebody got straight A's, everybody got to go out to dinner at some nice place. And there was literally never a year that didn't happen, because when she got a little bit distracted, then I had finally decided that, okay, I'm gonna get good grades this year. And so I actually read the stuff and
Didn't want to
turned the
miss that
stuff
dinner.
in and did pretty well at it. And I always kind of liked school, but it took some teachers at Lakeside to kind of get me engaged and really caring about what they were talking about.
Were you like the class clown, or were you just bored?
In my younger years, I tried to be the class clown, and because that's that was where you got the most attention. That was where kids got more of a kick out of the guy who got D's, but was laughing it up and didn't really seem to care. Lakeside, they actually liked people who sort of were serious about their studies and things like that. And I remember one time they were giving this quiz and they were pairing people up who you competed against, and they paired me up with this guy that I thought he knew nothing. And I thought, oh no, are they confused? Do they think I don't know? I don't understand this stuff. And that was part of deciding, okay, I'll get serious about my studies. And there was this whole thing of what college. Eventually I sort of figured out, oh, that if you don't get very good grades, you're going to be stuck, maybe not going to as good a school, and that sort of has follow-on effects potentially for the rest of your life.
Tell me about your mom a little bit. What was she like?
Well, she was very busy in community things. She was incredibly energetic, lots of activities in the household. She clearly wanted the kids to take school seriously and sign us up for more activities than we could think of. So she was an incredible mom, kind of set of an example of being involved, and she was very, very successful in doing all these sport activities at places like the university here.
So at some point, they seem to be getting pretty desperate about what to do with Bill because of school. And you mentioned once that they actually sent you to a professional to get some help. That seems to have been kind of a turning point for you. Was that as important as you portrayed in the past?
Well, I'm sure there were many turning points.
I mean, you present this guy like Judd Hirsch in Ordinary People as this wise man.
That's one of my favorite movies because of the guy, the psychiatrist there. I thought was pretty wise guy. And I'm sure there were a lot of different things, but that was a case where I really got a sense of all my energies. What did I want to focus on? Did I want to focus on proving that I didn't really care about the rules and what my parents were trying to impose on me, or should I focus my energies on kind of learning neat new things, or some of the sports stuff, or eventually the whole computer thing that came along and some friends and I really got involved in. And so it was kind of a turning point in saying that the outside world was where the challenge was, and that it's about the time that I got sent out to Lakeside, and that was an environment where you had to pay attention.
That must have been a dream for you, though, to go to Lakeside at some point. I mean, when
Well,
it all gelled.
once it got going after a couple of years, I'd say that. But I remember taking the entrance exam and deciding, hey, I don't really want to go to this place because they're really going to discipline me. And it'd be easy to fail the entrance exam. But my sister and I had always talked about tests and how we could do well on tests. So I just had too much pride that if I was going to do well on this test, particularly all these math questions that my sister and I had always talked about, felt like we were ahead on. So then I got in and I thought, geez, did I make a real mistake here passing this entrance exam? But in retrospect, having a school with small classes and really good teachers, that was a great thing for me. And then there was the the serendipity that they actually had a computer terminal out there that the teachers were intimidated by. And so it was myself and a few of my friends who became the experts of what the heck could this computer terminal do.
Is this where you met Paul?
That's right. It was mostly in school. You hang around with people in your own class. But when this terminal arrived, there were people of all ages who were kind of trying to figure out what to do with it. And I'd say there were 5 or 6 of us who were incredibly intense. And so it kind of cut across the age boundary. Paul was 2 years older than me.
Yeah, I was worried about that. I couldn't see how you would have met in class because...
No, not in class at all, just down at this computer terminal. And Paul wanted to figure it out. And, I had done very well at math, and so, I had this notion that, hey, I can figure these things out. And so Paul kept challenging me. He kept saying, no, can you figure this part out? Can you figure this part out? Because he, unlike some people who were just trying to show off, he really wanted to understand the thing. And so he and I became very close friends, and we, in the long run, we were the ones who were the most addicted or involved in the whole computer thing, staying late at night and eventually getting jobs from computer companies to work part-time even when we were 13 years old.
I was curious about that. First of all, it's kind of a Lennon-McCartney moment. Was there a second where you looked at Paul and said, this is the guy I can do stuff with? Or did it kind of grow? Well,
we formed a group. Paul had a friend and I had a friend. And so there were 4 of us. We called ourselves Lakeside Programming Group. and you know, the four of us.
It sounds like a company, and you were only in 8th grade.
Actually, 9th grade before we formed this group, and we took on some projects, and then when I was in 10th grade, my very, very close friend Kent Evans was killed in a mountain climbing accident, and so a lot of things I'd been working on, you know, Paul and I had to just work that much harder to fulfill the commitments, and then Paul and I took over doing the class scheduling for the high school. They'd actually had a teacher try and do it, but it was a very complex problem, and that had basically failed. So there was a year where the school was chaos because nobody knew which class they were supposed to be in, anything. So anyway, Paul and I worked on that in the summer. And
there's that myth you set it up so you could be in class with the best looking guys.
That's no myth. We had by then merged with the girls' school, but there was still about a 3-to-1 ratio, boys to girls. And so when I did the history sections, just by coincidence, I had 12 girls and not random girls, and just a couple other guys, but pretty wimpy guys in that one history section. So doing the schedule had its benefits. We also got paid to do it, and it was a deep problem. And I mean, to this day,
so you get intellectual, financial, and social benefits from programming.
It was a dream come true. I recommend it.
So let's go on through high school. I mean, it's a very curious turn you make from being the troubled student to going to Harvard. This is not what usually occurs in people's lives. I mean, that's not a turn. That's whiplash. How did you manage to get into Harvard? Was it grades? Was it because you were so good at taking tests?
Well, by 9th grade, 9th grade was the year when I decided to get straight A's and be serious. And so, you know, I had this whole thing where I sat in the back of the class, you know, in the back corner, never answered a question unless I was called on, and just sort of, you know, virtually memorized the book, you know, just read it 3 or 4 times. But I was careful never to take a book home because I didn't want to look like I was trying that hard. Anyway,
you didn't want to be uncool.
And then there were these early tests, PSAT or something like that, where I got, you know, perfect scores on that stuff. So by then I was certainly out in the open in terms of my intellectual ambition and desire to read and everything like that. And then this whole computer thing came along, and I ended up teaching the computer classes because some teachers had been intimidated
they're still scared
by
of
the thing. And then actually when these other teachers tried to do the class scheduling, they had me take over teaching some of their math sections. And so by now, you know, I was thought of as a real student. And then it was an interesting turn where I was offered a job working on this incredible computer project to computerize the power grid of the Northwest. Bonneville Power Administration was using these computers.
How old were you?
And it was a very challenging project. So I would have been, let's see, I would have been about 15 when I was offered the job, and 16 when I took it. So there was this question, would my parents let me take part of my senior year off and go work a few hours away down in Vancouver, Washington? And, you know, so my parents wondering, would it affect my school admission or anything like this? Well, that was a nice thing, because I was off working for this company. TRW was the one who gave me the job.
Did they know how old you were when you walked in?
Well, it was a funny deal. I mean, there's so many funny stories about this. What happened was this project was in deep trouble, where TRW had contracted to get this thing done on a certain schedule, and it just wasn't getting done. It was very complicated. And so they kept saying, who understands these computers, these digital equipment PDP-10s? And they said, well, when I had been younger, Paul and I had been finding problems in the PDP-10 operating system. And we'd just been sending in these problem reports. And at first, we were just sort of banging on the system, finding random problems. But eventually, we got the source code out of the garbage can and studied it. So our problem reports eventually were very sophisticated. Like, you know, this is how you fix this problem. And as long as you're in this module, you might as well improve this here. You know, and so people back at digital headquarters in Boston knew there were two people that were very smart about this operating system. And so finally, when TRW was saying to digital, oh, we got to get more experts in, we got to get experts in, you know, somebody said, you know, well, there's always Gates and Allen. You know, those guys know this operating system cold. And everybody said, well, who are they? Where are they? You know, nobody ever met these guys. Who are these guys? And so one guy said, no, I know who they are. I'll get them. So anyway, he had us come in for an interview, and everybody goes, wait a minute.
It's like show up in your school
these
sweater.
Are kids.
You know, I read those stories about you at Harvard, and obviously, we're the same age. It was the early 70s. So much gets in the TV movie and everything else, all that, your wildlife gets played up there. But it strikes me that you sound more confused about where you're going to go with your life than anything else while you were
Well, I didn't know. I wouldn't say confused. It wasn't like I was forced to make some decision or anything. You know, and you know, the nice thing about Harvard is there's all those smart kids just hanging out doing nothing. And so, you know, there's no shortage of people to just hang out and talk about the world and your parents and how all these things work.
Were you the party animal they make you out to be?
No. I was the opposite of a party animal. I mean, I had this thing where if I was signed up for a class, I wouldn't go to the class ever. I wouldn't attend it, and not by my sophomore year. So my positioning was more, okay, I get good grades, but I don't, I don't try at all. I never go to the actual classes
Too cool for school.
that I'm signed up to, and we'd just sit around and talk about stuff. I learned a little bit of procrastination, and that I had to unlearn later as I got out into the real world.
And that's where you met Steve.
That's right. Steve was different than I was. Steve was involved in campus activities. He was, in the clubs.
He seems more like your antithesis than your doppelganger. I was wondering how you guys
He and
got
I were
along.
a little bit opposites, because I was sort of against, all this campus stuff. I thought, those people are just trying to put it on their resume. Let's just hang out. And Steve had so much energy, but he's just his raw talent and his incisiveness. There, in our dorm, Steve and I ended up in the same dorm. There were sort of people who hung around Steve, and there were sort of people who hung around me. But there was this one guy who liked us both and kept saying, "You got to meet each other." And the first time we met, it was kind of like, "Well, you're in all this campus stuff. What kind of guy are you?" And he was sort of the ultimate of a middle-class guy who comes from Detroit and decides that he's going to make good at Harvard. And I kept giving him a hard time about that. And I was sort of the prototype of, the kid who sort of comes and says, this, I'm not going to get swept up in all this stuff. I'm taking a lot of nice classes, but still not sure where I was going with all of it.
Now, where's Paul in all this?
Well, Paul, of course, because he's 2 years older than me, when I'm working my senior year, he's taking time off. He's gone to Washington State University, so he's taking time off from that. Then when I go back to Cambridge, Mass, he and I want to brainstorm together. And so he needs to get a job. So I do this thing where I interview at this company, and I say, well, if you want to hire me, you have to hire my friend. And
he's 3,000 miles away.
So they interview him by phone because they're very enthused, and so they hire him. Well, then I decided, I didn't want to.
You didn't want to
do it. But so then Paul had a job, so Paul could move out to Boston and be with me and kind of brainstorm even during those years I was at Harvard. And so we kept talking about, hey, is the revolution going to happen that we've talked about? Should we do a company, or should we just go and do more mainstream things?
And then this happens.
That's right. Paul is in Harvard Square. There's a magazine stand there, and he always picks up popular electronics. But the fact there was this kit computer, that was what we talked about for so long. And in a sense, we were excited, but we said, God, this could happen without us. And so in that sense, it was kind of scary in a way, too.
So it was an epiphany. It must have been an epiphany. I mean, did you look at each other and say, okay, I'm going to drop out of Harvard, and we're going to move to Albuquerque and dedicate our lives to this?
Almost. What we said is, look, we are going to do the software for this, because we talked about this particular chip, this 8080 chip that was in here, was powerful enough. It was more powerful than a PDP-8, which had been an expensive kind of mini computer from Digital. And so Paul and I knew that we could write BASIC, Fortran. We could do some amazing stuff with this machine. So he and I called up this company and said, hey, we've got software. They said, there's some people who've called up and said that. Well, then, so we worked day and night for about 3 months and actually wrote the BASIC, which is the first product. And Paul flew out and actually ran the BASIC on their computer. And they were just blown away by that. And then they became our first customer.
What did your folks say, though?
Well,
it's like we got Bill turned around. He's doing well. We get him off to Harvard. Everything's fine. Now he wants to drop out of Harvard and go out and
not drop out.
Albuquerque.
Colleges are great about if you take a year or two off. You can always come back.
You're still in that leave of absence.
That's right. They, officially I could go back at any time. So they could tell I was very passionate about this. And I had sort of thought, well, I'll just go out for a year, then I can finish college and go back to it. I wasn't sure how intense it would get. So they didn't think of it as leaving permanently. So they were pretty supportive, in fact. And it was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where this MITS company was. And so Paul and I moved out there and started hiring our friends. And that was the beginning of Microsoft.
So it's 25 years later. Looking back, what would you tell that 20-year-old self?
Not much. I mean, the kind of passion we had, the optimism, the vision of what this thing would become. I mean, there's nothing more fun than that. Working with your friends to build something, seeing it come true, having to make all sorts of mistakes and having to fix those things. There's not a thing I would change.